Alamo of World War II, Westerplatte. We're starting in September 1939, literally day one of World War II. The place is Westerplatte, a tiny Polish military outpost on a peninsula near Gdansk. The defenders, 210 Polish soldiers. The attackers, the entire German Navy, supported by over 3,000 troops, heavy artillery, and the Luftwaffe. The Germans thought this would take maybe 12 hours. It took 7 days. Major Henryk Sucharski commanded this garrison, and when the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire at 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, these guys knew they were done for. But they fought anyway. The Germans bombarded them with naval guns, dropped bombs from Stuka dive bombers, and even sent in a flamethrower tank. The Poles fought from concrete bunkers and trenches with basically rifles and machine guns. They had no anti-tank weapons worth mentioning and were running out of everything: food, water, medical supplies. By day 7, half the garrison was wounded. They'd run out of ammunition for most weapons, and their position was literally crumbling around them. Finally, on September 7th, Sucharski surrendered. The Germans were so impressed, they let him keep his ceremonial sword. The defense of Westerplatte became a symbol of Polish resistance and bought precious time for Poland to mobilize. The bridge too far, Arnhem Bridge. Fast forward to September 1944. Operation Market Garden. Montgomery's plan to end the war by Christmas. Paratroopers would seize key bridges in the Netherlands and armoured columns would race through to Germany. Simple, right? Wrong. At Arnhem Bridge, Lieutenant Colonel John Frost and about 740 British paratroopers from the 2nd Battalion landed and secured the northern end of the bridge. The plan was to hold for 48 hours until XXX Corps arrived with tanks and reinforcements. XXX Corps never made it. Frost's men held that bridge for 4 days against the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions. Let me repeat that. 740 lightly armed paratroopers against 2 panzer divisions with tanks, artillery, and mortars. The Germans tried everything. They attacked with tanks. The Brits destroyed them with PIATs and gammon bombs from the buildings overlooking the bridge. They set buildings on fire to smoke them out. They brought in flamethrowers. They bombarded them with artillery non-stop. The British fought house to house, room to room. When they ran out of ammunition, they threw bricks. When one position became untenable, they fell back to another building. Frost himself was wounded, but kept commanding from a cellar. By the 4th day, they were out of ammunition, out of food, out of water. Most were wounded. They'd held the bridge as ordered, but help never came. The survivors, only about 100 men who could still walk, were finally forced to surrender on September 21st. The bridge at Arnhem was a bridge too far, but those men's stand was legendary. The Battered Bastards of Bastogne. December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last major offensive in the West. The 101st Airborne Division, along with elements of other units, found themselves completely surrounded in the Belgian town of Bastogne. About 18,000 American troops encircled by 45,000 Germans. No reinforcements, running low on ammunition, freezing cold, outnumbered more than 2 to 1. On December 22nd, the Germans sent a delegation with an ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. They expected the Americans to fold. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response? One word: nuts. The Germans were confused. They had to ask what it meant. When told it meant go to hell, they returned to their lines, probably shaking their heads. For 6 days, the 101st and attached units held Bastogne against constant German attacks. Panzers, artillery, everything. The weather was so bad that air support couldn't help. They were running out of ammunition so badly that they were rationing bullets. The defense was desperate. Medics were treating wounded in freezing cellars with minimal supplies. Soldiers fought in their summer uniforms because winter gear never arrived. They held their positions in foxholes filled with snow and ice. On December 26th, Patton's Third Army finally broke through the German lines and reached Bastogne. The siege was lifted. The defenders had held, and in doing so, they'd completely disrupted Hitler's offensive. The 101st Airborne earned the nickname the Battered Bastards of Bastogne, and it's still one of the most celebrated defenses in American military history. The Soviet Brest Fortress, June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Germany invades the Soviet Union with the largest military operation in history. One of the first targets was the Brest Fortress on the border. The Germans expected to take it in 8 hours. It took over a month. The fortress was home to about 9,000 Soviet soldiers and their families. The German assault started with a massive artillery bombardment at 4:15 a.m. that destroyed the water supply, the communications, and killed hundreds in the first minutes. The Germans then attacked with the 45th Infantry Division, about 17,000 men. What should have been a quick victory turned into a nightmare. The Soviet defenders, cut off, leaderless, and surrounded, fought from the rubble. They held sectors of the fortress with no coordination between them, just individual groups fighting to the death. Some sections held for days, some for weeks. The last known radio transmission from the fortress came on June 24th. "We are 3 men left. We are still fighting." German soldiers reported taking casualties from sniper fire from the fortress well into July. When they finally cleared the last resistance, they found inscriptions carved into the walls. "I'm dying, but I won't surrender. Farewell, Motherland, 20/July-41. The defenders of Brest Fortress were awarded the title Hero Fortress by the Soviet Union. Most of them never saw that honor. They died in the rubble, refusing to give up. Pavlov's house, Stalingrad. Speaking of the Soviets, let's talk about Stalingrad and specifically about a 4-story apartment building that became more heavily defended than some countries. September 1942. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and a platoon of about 30 Soviet soldiers captured a strategic apartment building overlooking a square in central Stalingrad. The Germans wanted it back, badly. For 58 days, Pavlov's men held that building against constant German attacks. The Germans threw everything at it: infantry assaults, tanks, artillery, Stuka dive bombers. They tried dozens of times to retake it. Pavlov turned that apartment building into a fortress. They fortified the basement, set up machine gun positions in every window, planted mines around the perimeter, and even dug a trench to a nearby building for supplies and reinforcements. The German 6th Army suffered more casualties trying to take Pavlov's house than they did taking Paris. Let that sink in. More casualties on one apartment building than an entire capital city. The defenders were a mix of Russians, Ukrainians, Georgians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and others, a true Soviet force. They fought room by room, floor by floor. When the Germans broke through on one side, the Soviets counterattacked from another. The building held until the German 6th Army surrendered at Stalingrad. Pavlov survived the war, and the building still stands today as a memorial. It's one of the most famous defensive actions in military history, proving that terrain, determination, and good tactics can overcome numerical superiority. The Alamo of the Pacific, Wake Island, December 1941. Just hours after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked Wake Island, a tiny American outpost in the Pacific with a Marine garrison of 449 men and about 1,200 civilian contractors. On December 11th, the Japanese sent a naval invasion force with cruisers, destroyers, and troop transports. The Marines, led by Major James Devereux, waited until the ships were in close range, then opened fire with their coastal defense guns. They sank 2 destroyers and damaged several other ships. The Japanese invasion force retreated. It was the first and only time in the war that coastal guns alone repelled an amphibious assault. The Marines radioed back to Pearl Harbor. "Send us more Japs." This is probably apocryphal, but it's a great story. The Japanese came back on December 23rd with overwhelming force: 4 heavy cruisers, aircraft carriers, and 2,000 troops. The Marines were out of ammunition, exhausted, and outnumbered about 5 to 1. They fought for hours in hand-to-hand combat. Finally, on December 23rd, Commander Winfield Cunningham surrendered to prevent the slaughter of the civilian workers. The Marines had held Wake Island for 15 days against impossible odds. The defenders became symbols of American resistance in the dark early days of the Pacific War. Many of them died in Japanese POW camps, but their defense of Wake Island inspired a nation reeling from Pearl Harbor. The 300 of World War II, Outpost Harry. Wait, wrong war. Let me jump ahead slightly. Actually, let's go back to the Eastern Front. Mamayev Kurgan, Stalingrad, January 1943. This isn't as famous as Pavlov's house, but it's just as insane. Mamayev Kurgan was a hill overlooking Stalingrad, strategically vital. Whoever controlled it could control the city. A Soviet battalion of about 300 men held the hill against repeated German attacks. The Germans wanted this position so badly, they sent wave after wave of troops supported by tanks and aircraft. The fighting was so intense that the hill's soil was literally mixed with metal fragments from shells and bullets. After the war, for decades, grass wouldn't grow on it because there were more metal fragments than dirt. The Soviets held their positions in bunkers and trenches, fighting off German infantry and tanks in close combat. They were resupplied at night by boats crossing the Volga River, but supplies were sporadic. Men fought with whatever they had: rifles, grenades, entrenching tools, bayonets, their bare hands. The position changed hands several times, but the Soviets always counterattacked and retook it. The fighting on Mamayev Kurgan lasted for 135 days. 135 days of constant combat on one hill. When the battle ended, they found the snow on the hill was black from gunpowder and explosions, and red from blood. Today, it's home to the Motherland Calls statue, one of the largest statues in the world, commemorating the battle. Hitler's Stalingrad, fortress city of Poznan, February 1945. The Red Army is rolling toward Berlin. Most German commanders are trying to slow them down, trading space for time, not at Poznan. Hitler declared Poznan a Festung, a fortress city. About 12,000 German troops under Major General Ernst Gonell were ordered to hold the city to the last man. No retreat, no surrender. The Soviets surrounded the city with 65,000 troops and began their assault. What followed was a brutal month-long siege that looked like Stalingrad in reverse. Germans defending urban terrain against Soviet attackers. The Germans turned the old Prussian forts around Poznan into strongpoints. They fought building by building, using the rubble as cover. The Soviets had overwhelming numbers and firepower, but urban combat negates a lot of advantages. Stalin was furious at the delay. He wanted his troops racing to Berlin, not bogged down in one Polish city. He sent more troops, more artillery, more aircraft. The Soviets pounded the city with Katyusha rockets and heavy guns. The Germans held for 28 days. They only surrendered on February 23rd, when they literally ran out of ammunition and food. By then, about 6,000 Germans were dead, and the rest captured. The city was in ruins. Poznan achieved nothing strategically. It delayed the Soviets by maybe a week or two. But it showed that even in 1945, with Germany clearly losing, fanatical defenders could still make the Allies pay dearly for every foot of ground. The last stand of the Japanese, Iwo Jima's Mount Suribachi, February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima. The Marines landed expecting tough resistance. They got hell on earth. Mount Suribachi, the volcano on the southern tip of the island, was honeycombed with Japanese defensive positions. About 1,300 Japanese soldiers under Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi defended the mountain. The Japanese had spent months preparing. They dug tunnels, built pillboxes, positioned machine guns and artillery in caves. They had interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. They were ordered to take 7 American lives for every Japanese death before dying themselves. The Marines attacked with flamethrowers, demolition charges, and sheer guts. Every cave had to be cleared individually. Every tunnel was a death trap. The Japanese would wait until Marines passed, then emerge from hidden positions and attack from behind. It took 4 days of the bloodiest fighting imaginable to take Mount Suribachi. The famous flag-raising photo happened on February 23rd, but that wasn't the end. The Japanese kept fighting from hidden positions for days afterward. The Marines suffered about 900 casualties taking Suribachi. Of the 1,300 Japanese defenders, only about 200 were captured. Most of them too wounded to fight. The rest fought to the death. And Suribachi was just the beginning. The entire island of Iwo Jima took 36 days to capture and cost nearly 7,000 American lives. The Japanese defenders' last stands made it one of the costliest battles in Marine Corps history. The forgotten last stand, the Australian 232nd Battalion. Let's talk about one you probably haven't heard of. January 1942, Malaya. The British Empire is getting pushed down the Malayan Peninsula by the Japanese advance towards Singapore. At the Battle of Muar, the Australian 232nd Battalion, part of the 8th Australian Division, was ordered to hold a position to cover the retreat of other Allied forces. About 650 Australians against thousands of Japanese troops. The Australians held for 3 days under constant attack. They were bombed by aircraft, shelled by artillery, and assaulted repeatedly by Japanese infantry. They ran out of ammunition and started using captured Japanese weapons. They ran out of food and water. Their wounded couldn't be evacuated. On January 22nd, they were surrounded. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Galligan ordered a breakout. Under cover of darkness, the survivors attempted to fight their way through Japanese lines and reach Allied positions. Of the 650 men, only about 271 made it out. The rest were killed, wounded, and captured, or missing. Those who were captured faced the horrors of Japanese POW camps. Many didn't survive the war. The 232nd Battalion's last stand is largely forgotten outside Australia, overshadowed by the fall of Singapore. But it was a desperate, heroic defence that bought time for thousands of other Allied soldiers to retreat. The Volkssturm's last stand. Berlin, April 1945. Berlin. The war is over. Everyone knows it, but Hitler isn't done yet. The defence of Berlin involved not just Wehrmacht soldiers, but the Volkssturm, basically every male between 16 and 60 who could hold a rifle. Many were old men and teenagers with minimal training and World War I weapons. These guys weren't fanatics. Well, some were Hitler Youth, but many weren't. They were just ordinary Germans who'd been handed a rifle and told to stop the Red Army. Imagine being a 55-year-old accountant facing T-34 tanks with 5 days of training. Some Volkssturm units surrendered immediately, but others fought, not because they believed in Nazi ideology, but because they were terrified of what would happen to their families if the Soviets captured the city without resistance. Soviet propaganda promised revenge for what Germany had done to the Soviet Union. These improvised defenders fought in the rubble of Berlin with Panzerfausts, handheld anti-tank weapons, rifles, and sometimes just determination. They held certain districts for days against overwhelming Soviet forces. It was tragic, really. Most of these men died for nothing in the final days of a lost war. Their last stand achieved nothing except adding to the death toll of a conflict that should have ended months earlier. But it shows that last stands aren't always noble or heroic. Sometimes they're just desperate and pointless. So there you have it. Some of the most intense last stands of World War II. From Westerplatte on day 1 to Berlin at the very end, soldiers found themselves in impossible situations and chose to fight rather than flee. Some of these defences changed the course of battles or campaigns. Others achieved nothing strategically but became symbols of resistance. Some were heroic. Some were tragic. All of them showed what humans are capable of when pushed to the absolute limit. These weren't always about winning. They were about holding the line, buying time, or simply refusing to give up even when defeat was inevitable. If you enjoyed this, Hit that like button and subscribe for more World War II content. Let me know in the comments which last stand you think was the most impressive, and if there are any I missed that deserve to be on this list. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.